Well, welcome once again to the Palestine Exploration Fund. And before I introduce tonight's speaker, I just would like to point out the fire escapes, which are over here and over here, in case of emergency, which of course will never happen. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Felicity Cobbing. I'm the director here at the Palestine Exploration Fund. And without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Bruce Routledge. Dr. Bruce Routledge is a reader in the Department of Archaeology, Classics and Egyptology at Liverpool University, and his research has focused on the Bronze and Iron Ages of the Levant, the best period in my opinion, and he has particular expertise in the Iron Age of Jordan, which is a fascinating thing indeed. He has strong interests in political theory, political economy, complex networks and embodied knowledge. And you can quiz him about all that afterwards. Since 2004, he has co-directed the Dhiban Excavation and Development Project, which is a community-orientated research project at Tel Dhiban in central Jordan. And this is the subject of tonight's talk. He's the author of many articles and books focusing on issues of state formation, hegemony, and power and interregional connections in the Iron Age. So without further ado, Bruce, please do.
Yes, I know. I've got my instructions here, and I'm not the most tech savvy, so this may take an embarrassingly long time.
Does it need
I've got no. There we go. I've swiped. Oh, it needs your face.
Not yours, mine.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you very much. And no one at home will know that incident just happened. Right. Hi, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and particularly in the PEF, and particularly in this new fantastic facility. And I want to stress this, really the focal point of this talk is there is a strong connection between the site I work at and the PEF, which is started a very long time ago. It continues today. I've got some research grants from the PEF. I think I'll point out very specifically some of the things we've done there as well. And so without any further ado, I'm going to jump in. And we'll start on 19th of August, 1868, when Friedrich Klein from the Christian Missionary Society and Zatam, the son of Fandi El-Fais, who was an important sheikh in the Beni Sakhr tribe, arrived in Dhiban and camped there as guests of the Beni Hamida, the tribe in this region. And the Beni Hamida asked Klein if he would like to see a stone that no Frank has yet seen. That stone was the Moabite stone, or as it's more commonly known today, the Mesha inscription. Now there, we've already got two of the three components of my title. We've got Dhiban, right? We've got 156 years. We're going to get to the PEF in a minute or two, although, to be honest, after I put this together, it should have been 155 years, because 1869 is the year where it all kicks off from the PEF's point of view. So let's get going. We're going to do a little bit of introduction before I get to those points. Okay, so Dhiban is about 70 kilometers south of Amman. It's in an agriculturally marginal area, and it is very close to the spectacular chasm of the Wadi Mujib. So you can see here, it's 2 kilometers south of Dhiban. So essentially, if you want to think in, for example, biblical terms, when you cross the Arnon, the first major settlement you would encounter would be Dhiban. It is one of Jordan's largest tells. It's about 12.5 hectares in size. We have occupation, or indications of occupation, from at least the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC, although none of it is in situ. That's residual early Bronze Age sherds. There are some big gaps, which are interesting problems. But the Middle and Late Bronze Age are not present so far. There is Iron Age. We'll see a little bit of that. And we'll also see some of the problems with the Iron Age at Dhiban, why it's disappointed so many previous archaeologists. It has really substantial later settlement. A little bit of early Roman Nabatean, then very substantial Byzantine and also Byzantine going into the early Umayyad period. And then there is a good-sized Mamluk village right on the top of the town. It's an interesting place because despite these gaps, right? So, for example, the Middle Bronze and Late Bronze, there's not a whole lot of Late Roman, and then there's a kind of gap between the Umayyad period and there might be some Abbasid, but there's a several century gap in there. So, despite this, there's really strong continuity. We didn't have to rediscover the name or guess what the name of the site was. You can track it right back. Right, so Dhiban, it appears in Arabic already in the 13th century in Yakutsk, Mujam al-Budan. It's in Sidious, and he says where it is on the edge of the Arnon. Dhiban, obviously it's in the Hebrew Bible, it's identified as a major, if not the major site of the Kingdom of Moab, and then very famously in the Mesha inscription itself. Right, so that's a very interesting and not that common phenomenon. And it's interesting, and I won't go on about this today, but it's interesting to think about the fact that people remembered that name and connections to this place, even when there was no sedentary settlement. As we'll see when we talk about the 19th century, there was certainly pastoral nomads camping at the site very regularly. It was a very important site for the Beni Hamida, and it's very likely that kind of connection in between the periods of sedentary settlement has characterized Dhiban since the 3rd millennium. Okay, so yes, it's famous for the Mesha inscription. I don't know what people do or don't know about it, but it is a royal inscription, what we call a commemorative inscription. It's a sort of autobiography of the king named Mesha, in which he reflects on the great achievements of his reign. Those achievements include what my Jordanian colleagues call a war of liberation against the Omride dynasty of Israel. And the first half of the inscription details the military campaign in which he defeats Israel and certain allies like the tribe of Gad and establishes his own control over what we understand to be Moab at a maximum extent, including both the Karak plateau and what in the Bible is known as the Mashur, the area, and in Arabic known as Akura, going from the Wadi Mujib up to Madaba. Okay, right. So, and it caused a huge stir when it went public, because not only is it's the longest extant inscription from the Iron Age, we could connect to the period of the Hebrew Bible. It also gives a kind of alternate account or parallel account to events that are already present in 2 Kings chapter 3. Right? And so, and you people here, the PEF will know more than anyone how important at this moment in time the idea and the hope of finding a material witnesses that would provide views on the Bible, and most people interested in that were interested in views that would substantiate stories in the Bible, right? And it's as the counter, for example, to German high criticism of the biblical text. Okay, so yeah, Mesha has pretty much dominated the site, and as we'll go along, that has led to many disappointed archaeologists over the years. It is, in fact, in many ways a problem for the site now. But it's an opportunity, because that's what people know about it, right? It is well known and famous. The Mesha inscription itself, through a route that I'll tell you a little bit about, is in the Louvre. You can go see it in Paris. It is viewed as very important in Jordan. In fact, the oddly named Mesha Center for Studies in Human Rights, based in Madaba, regularly pickets the French embassy in Amman asking for the repatriation of the Mesha inscription. However, I can say, the director of the Ministry of Tourism office in Madaba said to me off the record, he said, "I hope it never comes back, because do you know how much it would cost to get by that much advertising in Paris, right, for visiting Jordan?" So, but it is still it's a thing that exists now, that is of interest and concern to people now, right? Not only in the Iron Age or only in the 19th century. Right, so the connection to the PEF. I'm going to focus on two, what you might call controversies. The first controversy is the situation surrounding the Mesh inscription, Moabite stone, particularly how it got broken up and how the French got it was one area of concern. And then I'm going to, we'll move on to the next slide. Right, so Friedrich Klein, interesting figure because he's from Strasbourg, a German speaker who was an Anglican missionary. So he covers all three bases, right? The French, Germans, and the British. Many people did not forgive him, the British in particular, because when he came back to Jerusalem, he went to Julius Heinrich Petermann, who was the German consul in Jerusalem, and showed him the notes he had made on the letters of the inscription. They made a kind of deal, and Petermann began the process of trying to acquire the inscription, and they kept it quiet initially, right? So this is through late 1868 through into the spring or so of 1869. It's quite difficult. I'm not going to go into the details of this, but basically it's quite hard at this point in time just to go to Dhiban because the access route through Jericho and across Madaba is controlled by the Adwan, and the Beni Hamida and the Adwan were in a feud with each other at the time. The Beni Sakr claimed that they had authority over the Beni Hamida. Nobody has authority over the Beni Hamida, not even today. So also many people spent a lot of money and didn't really get anywhere, right? Okay, so this is the scenario. At some point, quite early on, Charles Warren got word of the existence of this inscription, and he said the gentlemanly thing to do is to allow Petermann to make the effort to acquire it. Clermont-Ganneau, he claimed he knew it before either of them. He also got involved at a similar time. There's something to think about. I'm not going to go on, but all of this is happening in 1869. A year later is the Franco-Prussian War. Right, so you're talking, and these are both, Clermont-Ganneau was a translator, a linguist, and a dragoman in the French consul in Jerusalem, and Heinrich Petermann was the German consul. So they're also directly in government employ. Right? Okay, so I'm gonna try and be quick because I have way too many slides. So stuff starts happening. Clermont-Ganneau says he asked Petermann twice about it, and Petermann denied any knowledge of this inscription. So he said, well, that's me off the hook. I don't need to respect his authority because he said he's not involved. He doesn't know anything about it. So he sent out emissaries to try and at least get a squeeze and possibly purchase the inscription, as is wont to happen in Dhiban. He got into a fight with Beni Hamida while he was waiting for the squeeze to dry. He had to pull it off quickly. Actually, he ran away, and one of his companions, Jamil, had to pull it off, and he got stabbed in the back of the leg while he was riding away. And so the squeeze is imperfect. It still exists. They did restoration work, and I was for the 150th anniversary of the Mesh inscription. Had a big show in Paris, and they put it out. I'd never seen it before. It was phenomenal. I don't know. I haven't been to the Louvre since COVID, so I don't know. There was some talk that it would go on permanent display beside the reconstructed Mesh inscription, but I'm not sure if that happened. If anybody's been there recently, let me know. Right, so the importance of that squeeze is the stone was still whole. And so eventually when we get to this point, Clermont-Ganneau used the squeeze and pieces of the stone that he was able to purchase to reconstruct it. So when you go now and you see it in the Louvre, you can see there's the bits, there's pieces of stone, and there's some filled in kind of plaster part, all of which has inscription on it. And that's based on a culmination of the squeeze and the stone. Right, okay, so the Prussian attempt failed. They went to the Ottomans. Not saying that top down is a Prussian characteristic, but they took a top-down approach. They went to the Pasha in Damascus. He then went to the Pasha of Nablus, who intervened, but unfortunately, the Pasha of Nablus had carried out a punitive raid against the Beni Hammida only 1 month prior in order to punish them for raiding the Mecca caravan. So they didn't like him very much. Right, so then they found that it had been broken up by November of 1869. The Prussians gave up. Actually, Peterman went back to Germany, changed posts. Clement Ganneau and Warren collaborated to acquire pieces. Clement Ganneau had more money and more luck. I'm not saying the PEF was slow to support the enterprise, but there are 5 letters or something to that effect. Warren turned over the pieces he did acquire, he turned over to Clement Ganneau, who had the bigger ones. Clement Ganneau was also a top-level philologist, and Warren was a surveyor, right? More like the old modern division between the text people and the archaeologists. And this led, amongst other things, to the fallout between Warren and George Grove. And in fact, Warren resigned from PEF in March 1870. Right? And this is one of the main reasons. So just to put this in here for my friends in the Humaida back in Dhiban, why is it broken up? So you'll come across this idea that they broke it up in order to find gold inside. Michael Press is a really interesting scholar. He's done some work here, and he did a little bit of work on this. He could find no accounts prior to the 1890s in which this claim was made. And in fact, in the early accounts, there's 2 possible stories that are offered. Palmer, in the Quarterly in 1871, he claims that that the disputes over the payment for another stela, the Rujum al-Abid or the Jebel Shihan warrior stela. If you go to the Louvre in the Oriental Antiquities room where the Mesh inscription is, up on the wall, don't miss it because it is really interesting and important. Up on the wall is a figurative stela of a figure wearing an Egyptianizing figure with a spear, and that was acquired by, and I'm just going to say it, the totally horrific person, Duc de Lunès, under very dodgy situation. And he, as a result of how he acquired and how the money was distributed, Palmer claims that there was a internal feud in the Beni Hammida tribe that led to bloodshed. So they didn't want that to happen again. So they broke up the inscription and gave it to different members of the tribe. The other version, Peterman's, is in fact saying that it was their hatred of the Pasha of Nablus that led to them breaking it up because they had the feeling the Ottomans were going to force it out of them and they didn't want him to get it and profit from it. So we don't know why, but these are I think, these are what you find in the earliest accounts. And the idea that they were trying to get gold out of the inside, already at this point in time, they knew they could get more gold by selling it than by finding it and breaking it up and finding it inside. Okay, the other connection between the PEF and Dhiban in the early days is the Shapira affair. I'm not going to go on. It's resurfaced again. He's most famous because in 1884 he attempted to sell a series of leather scrolls that he claimed was an alternative version of Deuteronomy to the British Museum. The newspapers claimed he was asking for £1 million in 1884. We don't know if that's true. It's a lot. I mean, the British Museum didn't pay that much for anything in those days, but who knows? And first Clement Ganneau, who was then by this point on a kind of mission to expose forgeries, he wasn't allowed to look at them, but they put 2 of the scrolls on display in the British Museum. So he came to London and he looked at them, like he bought a ticket, like a spectator. He looked at them and then he announced they were forgeries. And then shortly thereafter, they were analyzed in more detail by Ginsberg, a British biblical scholar, and it was declared they're forgeries. The public humiliation of this led Shapira to commit suicide in 1884 in a hotel in the Netherlands. Okay, Shapira was a bookseller and antiquities dealer in in Jerusalem, and what the earlier connection, 10 years earlier, he had been involved in a forgery, and that is the so-called Moabitica or Moabite pottery. The Germans were so keen not to miss out again that suddenly all of this strange inscribed pottery said to be from Moab, and particularly from Dhiban, surfaced in his shop. He sold almost 2,000 pieces to the Royal Museum of Berlin. Charles Condor saw the pieces in his shop that had already been designated. It was in 1872. They'd already been designated to go to Berlin, but he was fascinated by them, and he was convinced for something I'll explain in a minute. And so he did these drawings. This is in the archive here, and these are pictures of the pots in Shapira's shop, and also afterwards. And Felicity's already shown you've got some on display here still, because then Horatio Kitchener bought 6 or 8 or so pieces, I think, that didn't get sold to the Germans, and they've ended up in the PEF collection. Now, the reason Condor was convinced is he spoke to 2 Germans who had been taken on an expedition to excavate this pottery in Moab, and they specifically mentioned going to Dhiban, and digging up and finding the pots. Now, the thing is, the expeditions were organized by Shapira, and well, we don't know. He always claimed that he was also a victim, but a guy named Salim Khari made the pottery, and what was exposed was basically they were salting these sites ahead and then bringing people to them. So they would dig up and find it and say, oh, this looks just like the pottery in Moshe Shapira's shop. Okay, so these were big deals in the PEF quarterly statement in the early days. Okay, I've gone the wrong direction. Right, these are, you can see, I've seen these just like an hour ago, less than an hour ago. You can see them after the lecture, I believe, at least this one you can. Right, so think about this though, right? 1869 was the very first issue of the Palestine Exploration Fund quarterly statement. When Warren knew about it was when the publication started, right? Both the Mesh inscription and the Shapira affair weren't just discussed in academic journals. It was a big deal in the swish sets. I don't know what the correct term is these days. Whatever you don't know what young people say about, but anyway, what the cool people were reading. All right, so the Athenaeum, the London Times, the London Illustrated News. But the PEFQS was very clever because first they made a point of publishing original contributions of the protagonists. So Warren, Klein, Clermont-Ganneau, Condor all published their version of events. But also the PEF reprinted, translated, and compiled letters and short opinion pieces that had appeared in other publications, particularly in German and French publications, but then brought them all together so you could read them all in sequence, right? The letters to the editor going back and forth. That made the quarterly the center point for these debates, right? And I would suggest these Moabite controversies played a key role in this first 5 years or so of the existence of the Palestine Exploration Fund quarterly statement, because it made them the kind of go-to source for the biggest, hottest topic of the day in biblical archaeology, right? So I think that's an interesting connection. But the PEF didn't stop there. They also went to the site under difficult situations that got better and better through time because the Ottomans did eventually assert their control, and they sent a garrison to Karak and made travel easier across the different tribal boundaries in Transjordan. Okay, and what the first people sent out were Palmer and Drake. They went on a long expedition all the way from the Sinai through the Negev up through Jordan to Moab, They described the site of Dhiban. Their verbal, Clermont-Ganneau used their verbal description. Clermont-Ganneau himself had never did go to Dhiban. But he used the verbal description to make a map of the site. This is the first ever map of Dhiban, published in 1871 in the Archaeology Review Archaeology. And that was based on Palmer and Drake's description. Okay? Now, this is not a PEF project. Konrad Schick, who did have connections to the PEF, but this is published in Zeitschrift der Deutschen Palästina Vereins in 1879. He's taken the mesh inscription. Like none of this are things on the ground, right? Other than the idea is spread across two hills, all right? And what he's done is he's stuck in things from the mesh inscription and labeled them physically. It's physically on the plan. As my colleague said the other day, we dug there forever. And we're always there in the summer and it's hot. And he said, oh man, we could have used a king's garden when we were digging. Wouldn't that have been nice to have a nice garden to dig in? So, all right, so that's Schick's. This isn't the map, but Frederick Bliss also visited Dhiban under the auspices of the Palestine Exploration Fund in 1895. And what's interesting is he describes a large Roman tomb, elaborate Roman tomb. And in fact, there is one just to the east of the town. The Department of Antiquities have been working there since 2018, clearing it and trying to get it so you could come visit and see it. It's a weirdo tomb. It's because it's like it has loculi, very odd, a long, narrow, like offshoot thing that is sort of half cave, half carved tomb. It has this forecourt, which is very nicely designed, but you go through the door. It was also reused as a house in the Ottoman period. And what they did, it has a dome here. These houses are built on top of nothing, actually. It has a dome. And to support the dome in the Ottoman period, they took some of the stone sarcophagi and put them on the ends and made columns. So in the center of this, there's 2 or 3 stone sarcophagi stacked on top of each other. I just hope that the DOA keeps it, because it's from the 19th or 18th century, but it's really interesting. Okay, so I looked to find Bliss that he made a drawing in his report. I made a drawing of the molding, because I wanted to get it and then give it to the DOA. He said it's not published, but it's preserved at the office of the fund. And I asked her here in August. We looked for it, and it's not. You have everything else. Everything else. But this is a footnote in his report that it's here. So maybe if you're in the library, dig around in the archives, maybe you'll find it. That's what you're looking for. Something like that. Okay, George Smith made a very simple topographic plan. In 1903, again under the PEF's auspices. But the really big deal and really interesting is Duncan Mackenzie. He'd been hired to start excavating at Tel Bet Shemesh, and he was directed while they were waiting for their firman, I think, to go to Dhiban, and he decided to make a map of the site. So this was the first proper map of Dhiban. He did it. It was actually F.S. Newton did it. It appears they did it in one day. And they did it by pacing, not with proper any other sorts of measuring instruments, chains or anything like that. It's really good job. I mean, it's not bad. It's fairly accurate, except on the steep slopes, and that's very understandable because you're going to get off when you're walking up and down slopes. What I want to highlight is they marked in areas where they said from the surface remains was where the medieval Arabic or Islamic village was. Okay. Also something to note, because today this is where the modern town is. So he shows ruins on the southern hill. Those are not accessible now, although people show us stuff they found when they put their basements in and stuff like that. Right. But then this part is completely covered by the modern town. So this is important, and I'll come back to this in a minute, but remember that he showed the area, and we should have paid more attention to that ourselves in our own project 100 years later. All right, and in some ways, it's even a better map than the map that was done by the American Schools of Oriental Research when they began working at the site in 1951. Mainly because they used such a coarse set of contour lines, you don't capture any of the shelving, which turned out to be quite important. And I'll show you on our map. So that's a 5-meter contour interval, right? We did 50-centimeter contour intervals, and you can see how all the way down the slope there are these shelves, and those correspond to changes in the occupation of the site when it was bigger or smaller. All right, and so we did all this fancy work. We wanted to find out what's the edge of the Mamluk village, right? We didn't trust that Mackenzie's map was like real, right? And so we did these controlled surface collections, and we did little test pits, and we found out that essentially he was right that on the most part, he captured the limit of the Mamluk village and where the Byzantine city was right below the surface. Okay? Because we'd spent a lot of time digging Mamluk stuff, and we got a little tired of it, and we wanted to start digging earlier material. So we were looking for where on the site it would be at the surface. We could have just used his map. Okay, so Mackenzie's mapping project. The Americans worked there in the early 50s. In fact, when we first came, some of the old people still called the tell America. That was their name for the tell. And they used to say, if you want to get out of the house, because you can't be seen. If you go on the far side of the tell, nobody in town can see you. That's where you find all the Iraq bottles and the other things. They said, you're going to go out. You tell your wife, I'm going to America. Don't expect me back. And then to go on the other side of the tell. That's what they told us anyway. Right, so these excavations William Morton was in the ASOR team. He decided they were digging in the wrong place. He moved up to the Citadel. They were never published, and this is how I got involved. I found them in the garage of his widow in Kansas City. And eventually got responsibility for publishing them. We started working on that. There was aspects of the field notes that we couldn't make sense of. And so we decided we'll just have a little go back at Dhiban. The Department of Antiquities and the government was starting to do work there. And we've never left, unfortunately, in some ways, for the past 20 years. Right, and I have loads of co-directors. Nobody ever leaves. They just cycle through, have children, come back again, whatever. So I'm the one constant, and I have a lot of co-directors and people I've worked with over the years. Right, now, this is the thing. I went there like an Iron Age specialist wanting to study the Iron Age, and I had a common experience. Mackenzie, I could have listened to him, maybe gone somewhere else, because he says right in his report, when we walked across the site and saw all the arched buildings, we had to confess to a feeling of disappointment, if not actual dismay at the discovery, recognizing there was so much large-scale late architecture that's going to have deep foundations, etc. Doug Tishingham also didn't read that or didn't take it seriously, because at the end of the ASOR excavations, he wrote, "One must confess that even after 3 seasons excavation at Dhiban, the amount of new light thrown on the history and civilization of the Moabites is very meager." All right. Now, I will show you some stuff, and you can piece together some interesting things. But actually, the biggest thing I learned from working at Dhiban is that archaeology, and particularly tells, are not about single periods. Tells themselves are things that have persisted in place, and people are living with the past right under their feet. Right? So their lives and the past are all mixed together. And Dhiban is totally like that. Everything is mixed. I'll show you some examples of particularly reuse and recycling. Okay, so there's William Morton, not looking very happy, and he came back. So we started by cleaning up his old excavation trenches on the summit. He had found a large building that seemed to date to the Iron Age period. He called it Mesha's Palace. So we showed up. He didn't backfill, so there's a lot of erosion, a lot of problems. So we cleaned up. We cut the sections back to draw them, and it is as messy and complicated as it looks. This is just to show you. This is the red line is the upper limit of the Iron Age, and you've got Nabatean above it. There's an Nabatean foundation trench that cuts through it. There's also like some animal made a burrow, like dug right into Morton's excavation trench section. So there's a lot of animal disturbance all the way through this. And we looked in more detail over on this side. It was better preserved. Okay, and there is, the building is Iron II. We would date it to Iron IIB. We would date it probably to the 8th century rather than to Mesha. The earliest foundations, don't know what people do or don't know. It has built up foundations. You can go look that up. So they're not cut down. They lay down the first course and they pile dirt in around it. There's 2 floors. The floors are unusual because they're very heavy plaster and then they have stone subfloor supports. So they're not normal house floors. They're quite well built. And there's more than a meter of Iron II deposit here. Okay? And pottery, you either really love it or you just can't stand it, right? So I'm telling you this pottery is mostly from the 8th century. There's very little bit from the bottom that could be, it would have to be late Iron IIA to date to the time of Mesha, maybe. I wouldn't go out, because there's not very many diagnostics, I wouldn't go out on a limb. And then there's Nabatean a little bit and Byzantine up on the top. Okay, the building itself, I actually did a preliminary publication of it before we ever started digging using Morton's notes. And there's 2 phases. He made it very big, extended it it's about 45 meters. After our work, I just decided it's probably not that big. And it's something more like this size, closer to being square, about 25 by 25 meters. The 2 phases do stand up. But I would make both of them smaller than in my 2004 book. And what makes it interesting, though, is that they now even more closely resemble a kind of public architecture from Israel-Palestine that is from the 8th century. I don't have a title on there, do I? You can't read it. They're called Tetrapartite Central Hall Plan. Very memorable, catchy name. They were, some work was done by Ann Killebrew and Gunnar Lehmann, some articles on this stuff, right? And so there's a whole series of these buildings. They're based around a long central room with clusters of rooms around the outside. Hatzor, Megiddo, Lachish. There's some very recent ones, Tel Ashur. This one's quite a bit like the Dhiban structure. Now, Morton had found 2 figurines in this area. And we found, even just in cleaning sections and cleaning up, we found a head of one. In the Mamluk phases, we found a reused, very badly beaten up one. Now, you have to take my word for it a bit, but she's holding a disc, and I'll show you the significance of that in a minute. And then this is one that we actually found down in the Wadi. I'll talk about it later. PEF had a little bit to do with that one, so we'll come back. Okay, so all across Moab, there is a form of female figurine in which she's clutching a circular disc to her chest, all over the place. Most of the figurines at Dhiban fit into this category. And the presumption, and I think it's quite reasonable, is that the disc is some kind of frame drum. Do I have that circled? There you go. This is a Phoenician bowl from Idalion in Cyprus. And there you go. If you don't know what a frame drum is, it's a rounded drum, right? Resembles a tambourine, but there's no cymbals on it. And so probably is depicting worshippers of some sort, playing instruments. But when we moved, we then went to dig to find the rest of Morton's building, and what we discovered is within a couple meters of where he stopped digging, Mamluks had cut a massive terrace all the way to bedrock to build on. So what we ended up digging on were some really substantial Mamluk structures. One is a barrel vaulted building, very complicated building. It has at least four separate use phases, and each time the interior is totally rearranged. The doors changed at one point. It's not domestic. It appears in the last phase to be related to animals, and the first phase to some kind of processing. There's actually a basin here, and this is late in excavation, but the plastering is designed to channel liquid across the room. It's interesting because in the Mamluk period, they're chopping and changing everything, and stuff starts to accumulate really rapidly. There's more than a meter of deposit inside the building with 3 separate floors, right? It's a great period for radiocarbon dating. We have 11 radiocarbon dates from this one room. We can show clearly that this over a meter accumulated in less than 100 years, almost all of it within the 14th century CE. Then there is a secondary use, kind of squatter's use, but before the roof collapses. That dates to what is really the end of the Mamluk Caliphate, the very beginning of the 15th century. We have a date of 1409 to 1445. Then we have a campfire inside the collapsed. So someone camped there somewhere in between the 16th and 18th century and had a little fire in the ruins of this building. Right? So it's quite interesting from that point of view of the last phase of the site. And all around it are these transverse arch houses, which are very typical for both Ottoman and Mamluk in the area. I'm going to get this. It's like 20 seconds where nothing happens. So there's a little video. And I also want to illustrate, since 2019, we've been doing all of our architectural documentation with digital photogrammetry. Is it moving? No, let's try this then. Let's do that. Is it going to go? Oh. Don't listen to me. I'm muttering something about this from another presentation. Okay, so we'll go about, it should start to twist. What we're doing is, has anybody encountered digital photogrammetry before? All right, so it's now very accessible and very cheap, and you can use a standard digital photo, and it's all in the software. You take pictures from all different angles. You can create a rectified, measurable three-dimensional model, which you're supposed to be looking at in this video.
Okay, so here is a digital photographic model that we made of 2 medieval houses.
Okay, and you'll get this in a sec. You'll see what the point of it is.
Overlapping photos involved. We used an overhead boom for the camera in this case.
Right. You can listen to me until I'm telling you what happens. I mean, basically, we have a really long. There we go. We have a very long camera pole, about 2.5 meters, and we take pictures from all the different angles we can. We create this three-dimensional model, but then also by taking total station points around it, we can rectify it and create a normal two-dimensional measure plan that is just the same as any plan you might do with hand drawing and is measurable, etc. Okay, so this saves loads of time in the field. It also makes up for the unevenness of people's skills in terms of documenting architecture. Right. So this two-dimensional plan is made from the three-dimensional model we just showed you. This wasn't done in the field. This plan was made back in the lab using the three-dimensional model. All right, so you know what I'm going to do? In the interest of time, and because PEF, there was no PEF funds involved in this, I'm going to go fairly quickly. Field S is where we encountered, from our service survey, we were able to identify where we could get Byzantine material right below the surface. Okay, I'll show you that, but I won't go on it at length. And so here we encountered a building that seems to have collapsed in an earthquake. All of the rubble is oriented in a south to north orientation, and the end wall, the north wall is just completely warped over. And you'll see actually the next picture shows it even better because it's an earlier phase. It was just a total mess. There are roof pavers, these big flat stones all over the place. Those are springers for arches. Okay, if you go down, this is showing you the organization. So the red are where the arches were for the building. And if you go down the road, Rasas is 14 kilometers east of Dhiban. It's a massive, superbly preserved site, particularly for Byzantine architecture. And there you can see these, how they're organized. So you've got these voussoirs, curved stones that support the arch, and then you've got the pavers. You can see them here. I should use this really. You've got these pavers that go across the arch to make the roof. This was some sort, it's large, it's not a standard domestic house, but it is some sort of food production facility, storage and production facilities, domestic. There's massive piles of pottery. We're having a hard time getting it all together. There's at least 50 reconstructible vessels, and some of them are quite strange actually. This juglet is lined with lead foil and sealed with bitumen. It was actually sealed when we excavated it. We got all excited. We had a conservator open it, but there's nothing but decayed lead inside of it. But I had an X-ray. I had like a MRI scan done of it at the vet school and everything. So, and it is actually lead foil that's lining the inside. If anybody has any ideas,
Curse tablet? Could it be a curse tablet?
No, because you can't get it out or in. I mean, it's very intentionally.
Well, they got it in somehow.
Oh yeah, they did get it in. It's intentionally protecting whatever was stored in it because it's lining it, and then it's got a bitumen plug that was wrapped in lead in the top. And we know that because we tried to X-ray it and we couldn't see through it. So that's why you had to do an MRI scan. So. But we didn't get any trace, like no residues or anything, because all the metallic was just lead. Okay, loads of pottery. Also loads and loads and loads of agricultural evidence, particularly evidence for grapes, but the archaeobotanist tells me grapes in a form that shows they were crushed for a winemaking is one of the ways. Also, we have the bones of a lizard with cut marks on it, which we thought was weird until we started talking to people and realized that actually butchering lizards is a common practice in the Eastern Desert and in Saudi, and is certainly attested in Arabic folklore up through, well, even till today. All quite interesting stuff. Right? Then, what's interesting is this is the mess, but what you'll notice is quite clean over here, and that's because in the immediately after, our radiocarbon dates were like 555 to 634 or so. And then the next phase, they cleared out one room of all the rubble and reused it. And this material is probably very early Umayyad. It could be very late Byzantine, but it's probably very early Umayyad. So somewhere in the middle of the 7th century, right? And Jordan comes under Islamic control in 636. So it's quite close to the moment of Islamic conquest of the area. Okay, and what they did is reuse this. This is they put a drain in. This is a reused millstone from a Roman rotary mill, Catullus, we can see here, they look like they've repurposed it to use as for drain. And I'm not going to go on about this, but all over Dhiban, you have this, the phrase reuse, reduce, reuse, recycle. Everything is like this. The walls, foundations are used as footings for new walls. You've got half of walls in one form of masonry and others in another. Lots of these examples of repurposing. Nabatean masonry is very distinct. So you'll get a Mamluk wall that will have one of those angular cut, beautiful Nabatean stones in it. There's one we used to call the Nabatean television, because that's how old we are. They look like the old analog patterns when the TV goes fuzzy. And it was just sitting like on a Mamluk wall, but like kind of had been exposed because the wall collapsed. We'd walk by it every day. And so that became the Nabatean television. Right, so down here, we're going to go down, way down the far side where nobody goes, on the western end of the site in the wadi. And there, with the assistance of the PEF in 2015-2017, I feel guilty because I don't think I gave you a report. But that's why I'm stressing it in my lecture. All right, okay, so look here. This is a natural karstic depression. Okay, that's a slope collapse. That's a wall. All right, so look at that wall. That's what we're gonna focus in on. All right, so here you go. You've got slope. You've got the karstic depressions. Then you've got the plastered wall, which is here. Sorry, the coloring's not good on that. And here we are excavating. It's the wall of a reservoir. So what they did is they built a wall on the outer edge of this depression. The runoff would come over the edge of the tell, down into the depression, and then the wall allows the water to accumulate. All right? It runs along here until it continues. It's now too deep because it's gone under the slope collapse. It's now under a couple meters of debris. But what is interesting is it's actually at least 3 phases. There's an outer wall, which is clearly distinct. And this, for reasons I'll show you in a minute, can be dated to the Iron II AB period. Okay? There is an inner wall that is Roman or Byzantine in reuse. They made the reservoir much smaller by building a wall up against it and ending it sooner. And then there's the Mamluk repair down in this corner, meaning that they're reusing this as well. Okay, and how we know, for example, that the inner wall dates to the Roman period or later is I'm going to show you this in a second, but the Iron Age wall is plastered. And so we wanted to look at the plaster, so we took out a section of the Roman Byzantine wall, and just like an archaeology textbook, sitting on bedrock underneath the wall was a coin of Antiochus Pius minted in Alexandria, year 18, so 154, 155 CE. Okay, so that's pretty good. There's some there's people with numismatic interests in this room, I think. So there you go. Yes. Right, so what you see here is, we haven't been exposed very much, but this wall here ends and it turns a corner. The Iron Age wall keeps going, but it was buried by a massive Byzantine fill. This is a Byzantine terrace wall that ran over it, okay, and then the slope collapsed, so the landslide is a little bit further in. So far, we have 45 meters of it exposed, and now it's becoming logistically very difficult to go further. Okay, there's the plaster on the Iron Age wall. Okay, and we know it's Iron Age because we dug on the outside of it, and deposits up against the wall are consistently and completely Iron Age. Again, pottery. Okay, this is some residual early stuff. We've got some Iron 2A. We've got Iron 2AB transition, and we've got some very early Iron 2B. So you could argue about. The question is, in the mesh inscription, he says, I built the wall of the reservoir in the city. So I don't want to become an old school biblical archaeologist, but could this be the wall of the reservoir? It's not in the city, it's outside the city, but it is at least give you an interesting idea of what that might have looked like. Okay. And we found a super crude stamp seal in the deposits against the wall, but you can match it to Abu Kharaz in the Jordan Valley and early Iron 2B site context, and they have a very similar, better executed, but similar cross-hatch design on the seal. And then we found what we think is the Iron Age tip right on the edge of the wadi. So that's where we were, right? That's the reservoir wall. These are the Byzantine fill deposits. And then we hit this really weird thing. It's a pit full of rocks, but it kept going. We dug through, but it just kept going. In other words, there was still material under it, and it's like a pit that was cut into a pit, and the upper one was filled with rocks. It's really badly disturbed. There's animal burrows everywhere, so we had to go quite deep before we got clean deposits. But there is loads of animal bones, also olive pits, lots of stuff like that, and then loads and loads of Iron Age pottery. And this is where we found the other figurine head, all down there in this dump, basically, or what we call back home the dump, the tip. Okay, now the last bit I want to talk to you about also leads up to something that I'm going to do. It's going to happen in July. I got a little bit of money to come here in August as part of the preparation. All right, so here this is the North Mound. That's modern Dhiban on what was the south, identified as the South Hill, right? Dhiban is a economically deprived city, town. I mean, it is the sub-capital. Madaba Governorate has a division between Madaba and then the Dhiban sub-governorate. The Dhiban sub-governorate is definitely the poor cousin. It's one of the poorer jurisdictions in Jordan. And we've always wanted to do stuff. We didn't really get it together, though, for a very long time. It was quite hard. But then, in 2016, so Dhiban became the center for Jordan's Arab Spring. And in 2016, there was a full-on riot, economically motivated. There's about my estimate is like a 70% youth unemployment rate. I don't know. I mean, it's just all the guys work for us and then go sit in the circle the rest of the... That's not quite true, and it's not as true anymore, but youth unemployment was very high. Right, so the one and only time Dhiban ended up in Al Jazeera was because of this very violent riot in 2016. That really shook us up. It shook up the government. Lots of people, we've got to do something to try and realize some of the economic value and cultural value of the site. So we've been focusing, certainly since 2019, a big part of what we've been doing has actually been on this site development and community engagement component. Right, so we've teamed up with the NGO Sela, a fantastic Jordanian NGO. They do all sorts of things, but they do cultural, heritage-oriented vocational training in conservation and site cleaning, stuff like that. We've trained some guys, so they have a certificate if they want to go work at another site, and they have formal training. We had eight women and men, so 4 women and 4 men. We could not have done this ourselves. Sela, we could never hire women, but it was during COVID. Sela, I subcontracted the work to them, and they could, and that's a great thing about having a really good local partner. So we were able to train 4 women as well as 4 men in basic dry laid stone architectural conservation. And then we started a big project. Now, I haven't talked about this at all. We stayed away from the Nabatean temple where everybody worked. Everyone said the mesh inscription came from. The Americans dug it like mad. It was just a mess. I just couldn't get my head around how in the world would I ever deal with that. So I went and dug, like a coward, I went and worked on another part of the site for years. But we said, well, we've got to fix this up. So we started doing consolidation work on the podium, cleaning work. Okay, we backfilled old excavation areas because they've all been open and eroding since the 1950s. We did some work on supporting eroding slopes, right? And there you can see the fortifications, which are clear on the eastern side. Also, the Department of Antiquities did a lot of work in exposing them more consistently. And we've done pathways through the site. The focus is on low cost, low maintenance, so we don't leave them a burden when we go away, because we are going to go away. And that's the thing when you're a foreigner. So you have to think about that. Here's what this area looked like in 2008. Here it is in 2024. Okay, and so that's actually a football pitch that the Waqf provides for the kids. Here's the Nabatean Temple. Here are the pathways. The Ministry of Tourism is building a visitor center, and we're going to get the signs. We've paid for the signs. I just haven't finished them. And we're going to get the signs are going to go in this summer, right? But it's also, there's a research aspect. While we're cleaning stuff up, we've actually gotten interested in the Nabatean Temple. Asor left a load of big bulks behind, so they're a mess. We got to dig them, get rid of them anyway, so we've been excavating them. We found a plaster floor in the Nabatean Temple that they dug through. They missed completely. There it is. The other half of the room must have had, well, we know because it's visible in a section they drew. They drew it in a section on the other side of the room, but the architect who drew it was not the person who dug it, so they dug through it in the room. And we've found all sorts of stuff, all these multiple phases that are earlier. So on this side, we're still dealing with massive Byzantine fills. That there's a church, the Asor excavated, that cuts across the end of the temple, and there was a whole series of burials under the. It was a paving floor, burials under it. The Asor excavated. We've been cleaning this up. This is Byzantine fill. We found a Byzantine tomb, but we weren't equipped. We didn't have a physical anthropologist, we didn't have an osteoarchaeologist with us. We found a couple finger bones, so we stopped it and backfilled it, and we're going to take care of it next time properly. This side, though, we're dealing with subfloor, Nabatean foundational material so far. And there you go. We're finding it's a lot more complex than is portrayed in the Asor publications. So there's multiple phasing to many of these walls. So this is just coming out of, we were in there to do cleanup work and conservation work, but we're actually getting academic insights out of it, including, it's a terrible picture, and because we didn't, and I'm bringing in the photographer with me this time, it's very hard to photograph. It's a really weird bulla, because in the Byzantine area, all of that fill was taken from Iron 2B context. So even though it's Byzantine, right, because the latest material is dating it, most of the material is 8th century Iron Age pottery. And we found this bulla, which I'm not sure you can tell, but these are stick figures. Right? So it has a raised bezel, a rim. That's going to be from a seal. There's figures here. It's divided into 4 quadrants, each of which has a kind of stick figure in it. It's also very weird because it's ring shaped. It looks like a clay ring. And so we presume, so it doesn't look like a normal bulla, which has string marks on the back. A bulla, because it was used to close a papyri roll. We think it was wrapped around something, because it would have been circular, like about that, big around, with the stamp on top. So we haven't published this or anything yet. So you're privileged, I guess. And we're gonna get it properly photographed in July and then have that out. This is the very last thing. We've also done community engagement work. So we've got a children's book out. I had a peaceful and gracious journey in Tel Dhiban. Maybe a bit false advertising because I've never had a peaceful and gracious journey. It's all about a school group who comes and they learn the story of the Meshach inscription. And then these historic photos, and this is why I was here in August. What we discovered is, accidentally, archaeologists have captured the modern town's development because it's a recently settled, the Beni Hamida town only really started getting going in the 1940s. And Tel Dhiban was designated as the very first historic site of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan in 1926. So that's why that's why the modern town is not on the ancient town, right? So you get things like this. We can see, while the town's still in development, right? So we can show people, can you find your grandfather's house here in the aerial photos? This Sheikh's tomb that used to be on top of the Nabatean temple was removed by Asor with quite limited documentation. But we know the family is still around, Salam bin Masla. They have a family story. They know about him. He's actually not from Dhiban. He's from Fakua on the north end of the Karak Plateau. He was camping with he's Beni Hamida, but from the Karak side. He was camping in Dhiban. They ended up in a raid, and he was killed. And he was buried at Dhiban. And that, up until 1951, that was there. So we've, one of our plans is we've done some drawings and stuff, tried to capture it as best we can. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a show in town of historic photos and all the other stuff. Guys who work for us, they want to see the 3D models because they don't get to see them in the field. And then we're going to invite people to bring forward anything they have in their own personal family, whether it's tangible or intangible, like stories that connects the town and the tell. And that's sort of one of our community engagement projects that PEF is now involved in. And the images that, they're really stuff I was hoping for some bit better, but they're not bad. There's a few that aren't bad, and they're going to feature in the show along with a number of others that we've acquired. So that's it. I know I went longer than Felicity told me to go, so I'll stop now. I don't know.
Well, thank you very much. An extraordinary story, amazing complexity. Are you happy to take any questions?
Sure.
Yes. So we have a few minutes. For some questions, if
Do
anybody
we want the
would
questions
like.
recorded?
We can't do.
No, I don't know if you. Yeah.
Is it recording on the camera?
On the
It's
camera.
recording
Oh, very
on the
good.
camera,
Oh, good.
So
Okay.
that'll catch it. Well, perhaps I could start,
Yes.
if that's allowed. I'm not an archaeologist, but I was intrigued by the story of gaps in the
Yes.
historical
Yes.
context of this site.
Yes.
And I wondered if the seismic activity, you did demonstrate some evidence of earthquakes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are all sorts of reasons why people
Right.
leave cities.
Yeah.
But one of them is that the city's fallen apart as a result of an earthquake. And I wondered if there was any
Yeah.
evidence for that.
The only earthquake evidence we have is the one Byzantine context. And as it happens, the Byzantine period is also the period where we have the best textual evidence for earthquakes occurring in Palestine in particular. The thing is, this is a general phenomenon in Jordan. It's much more prominent than in Cisjordan, right? So in Israel-Palestine. And it probably reflects the marginal environment, right? So people work, like being sedentary isn't really what people do. They work on a sliding scale, okay? And so you might have houses, you might live fairly permanently. You'll often have other interests. Family members will have herds and all. And so when things happen, right? So one thing would be an earthquake, for example.
Agricultural failure.
Agricultural, yeah. Let's say you have a couple dry years, right? Or you're in a bad political situation. Some people blame the Ottomans for the desert. Basically, there's almost south of Salt. There are almost no sedentary towns until the 1870s in Jordan. So yeah. So I think an earthquake would be one sort of proximate cause, but it fits into a larger pattern that people are mobile because they're looking at their options and they'll move around. Yeah.
Yes.
Have you got any sort of idea of the dates of the Nabatean structures?
We don't have loads of good Nabatean context for the most part, and I know like Stefan Schmidt has this phenomenally detailed typology, chronology based on the Swiss excavations of Petra. I don't, but it's not my thing. So I have a colleague who does do this. She places it mostly most of it is in the 1st century BC, and a little bit that might go into the 1st century AD, but it's on the earlier end for not the earliest end, but it's not the Nabatean that's just essentially contemporary with full-on Roman.
Are there any further Nabatean sort of architecture further north?
Yes. I'm trying to think off the top of my head sites that have a lot. I mean, you define Nabatean, there's two different ways, right? Either they're credited in texts that way, don't find, other than Basra, you don't, in southern Syria, you don't find very much that they're credited as controlling. But the other thing is it's got loads of Nabatean pottery, right? So I'm trying to think. We're right on the edge of Perea, right? Like, so when you get up to Madaba and Nebo area, the Hasmoneans were in charge, controlled that territory at the same time. So some people have argued there's actually a boundary of some kind, maybe in the Wadi Zarqamain, which is a little bit north of Dhiban. But I'm trying to. I know there's. I'll come up with one while we're having wine. Where if you're thinking about a place that has loads of Nabatean pottery. There is Nabatean at Khibr Modena in the Wadi Efeme, where Michel Davio worked. Off the site, they have a structure that is both architecturally and in terms of the ceramic content classified as Nabatean. That is not too far north, but a little bit north of Dhiban. Yeah.
Okay, I tell you what I'm going to do. I mean, others will have questions, I know, for you over a drink, as you suggested. Very good idea. So if I may, I just thank you formally once again for an excellent talk. It really was a great pleasure to have you here as our guest. If I may, I also ask one or two of the stronger members of the party perhaps to stack up the chairs, watching out for the camera. Don't break that apart, and then we'll continue.
Okay.
I'm sure fire questions at you. So thank you once again.